Well, it's tough to talk about Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution without also talking about his Argentine comrade in arms, Che Guevara. They met in Mexico and created history together. Guevara became a cultural hero of rebellion for people around the world, and his influence lives on today. CCTV's Joel Richards is live for us in Buenos Aires. Joel, what are people there saying?
Afternoon, Asia. Well, obviously reaction is coming in from around the world and also here in the southern part of Latin America. In Uruguay, an official day of public mourning has been announced. In Chile, the president, Michelle Bachelet, wrote on social networks that Castro was, quote, a leader for dignity and social justice in Cuba and in Latin America. Now, here in Argentina, the former president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who enjoyed a very close relationship with Castro, also said, quote, he was an example of dignity and sovereignty. In the Mauricio Macri government in power here in Argentina has both sent its condolences to Cuba, but also thanked it for its historic support of Argentina's claim over the Malvinas, or the Falkland Islands. Now, as you mentioned, Ernesto Guevara, El Che there, Argentina does have a slightly unique relationship with Cuba, the Cuban Revolution, and of course Fidel Castro, because the relationship between El Che and Castro was absolutely vital in shaping the direction that the Cuban Revolution took. His is one of the most recognizable faces of the Cuban Revolution. This mural is just one of the tributes around the world to Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentine medical doctor who teamed up with Fidel Castro and became an icon for the international left. His face can be seen all around this city, but while Che Guevara is one of Rosario's most famous sons, it's far from his birthplace that the legend grew. Guevara's youngest brother, Ramiro, now lives in Rosario, having grown up in Cuba. He's too young to have ever met his older brother, the youngest child from their father's second marriage. But now he works at the Center for Che Guevara Studies.
Che has the very unique context of having died young. We'll always have the face of the young Che. Now I see my older brothers who are 80 or so, and I see what my brother would have looked like.
While Ramiro Guevara never met El Che, Calico Ferrer remembers him well. Guevara's childhood friend agrees that his early death added to the legend.
Che is the pure leading figure. Governing takes its toll. Che was taken early, and his image is that of how he always was, an extraordinary man.
Ferrer traveled with Guevara on his second trip across Latin America. The first trip, with Alberto Granados, was made into the Hollywood movie The Motorcycle Diaries. Ferrer parted company with Guevara in Venezuela, only later reading in the newspaper that his friend had joined the Cuban Revolution. He says it was the meeting in Mexico with Fidel Castro that transformed Guevara into a revolutionary.
He's introduced to Raúl Castro, and Raúl invites him one day to a meal, which is where Fidel and Ernesto meet for the first time. The next day, Fidel announced to the people there, "Now we have a doctor for the expedition." Ernesto had said yes. They had spoken all night, and that's when he made the decision. For me, that's when Ernesto becomes El Che, that day.
Alongside Fidel Castro, El Che became one of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution, but they were joined by a group of like-minded young men.
There are coincidences, and there is a certain degree of randomness that brings together so many people. It wasn't just Che and Fidel. There was a whole revolutionary group of people from that time with a capacity that was not only intellectual, but also in terms of their knowledge and acts that meant the Cuban revolutionary process was successful.
With his Marxist views and oversight of ambitious social projects such as land reform and literacy, Guevara became one of the most prominent members of the Cuban Revolution.
Che is a key figure, but always under the direction of Fidel. Fidel always led, and he was extremely important for the unity. That's why the Cuban Revolution is interesting. They achieved a unity, something that is the hardest today in process of social change.
Che Guevara hoped to export the Cuban model across Latin America. He was executed attempting to do so in Bolivia in 1967 at the age of 39. His remains lie in Cuba, but his persona, like that of Fidel Castro, lives on across the world. So Che Guevara then indelibly linked Acier with his work in Cuba, and of course that relationship with Fidel Castro, which again, as we said, makes it such an important relationship between Argentina and with Cuba. Che Guevara, undoubtedly one of the icons of Argentine history, and another icon for different reasons is Diego Maradona. And today he was another of the famous people giving their opinion about the news of Fidel Castro passing away. He said that Fidel Castro was indeed a second father to him.
Joel, we've been talking about Fidel Castro's impact on Cuba, but really also about his broad influence on left-leaning politicians in the entire region. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Very much so. So the Cuban Revolution was, for a certain generation in the 1960s and the 1970s, very much an example that people across Latin America took as being proof that revolution was possible. Of course, many historians will have analysis of that. But in more recent years, this tide of left-leaning governments, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Evo Morales in Bolivia, the Kirchners here in Argentina, all very much saw Castro as, if you like, an advisory elder statesman role for the Latin American left. And it's not just the ideology and the policies, but also very much, as we heard in the earlier interview, his charisma and the bravado in defying the United States in particular. So undoubtedly Castro, a man whose place in the Latin American history is sealed.
CCTV's Joel Richards live for us in Buenos Aires.